Graduated from flying school at Yorkton on June the 30th of 1941. After arriving in England, I eventually was posted to an operational training unit. The British Spitfire was always just a touch behind the German aircraft until later on in the war, and eventually the Spitfire probably surpassed almost anything the Germans had, but up to quite late in the war, the Germans were superior in some aspects, and then of course the Spitfire, vice versa, was also superior in others. We were sent out. There were reports of German E-boats just off the Dutch coast, and our squadron located them. There were 5 German E-boats in the water, and we weren't entirely sure whether they're German boats or the British had small boats about the same as the E-boat, and they were pretty well hard to tell which was which. So anyway, one pilot was designated to go down and fly over the E-boats, and at that time they opened fire and started shooting at us with their anti-aircraft guns, so we therefore attacked them, and we sunk 3 of them, left the other ones burning in the water, and the squadron got a very nice commendation from the British Navy. That was the early part of the war, and then later the squadron moved to the southern part of England, where we took part in daily operations of escorting bombers and what they call sweeps over a truck on one of the French roads, and I proceeded to attack it. And having shot it up, I was immediately hit. The aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire. And a ball of fire shot up between my legs. It would be the size of a basketball, just like a blowtorch, and black, oily flames. And I attempted to back off, doing this, back up and stand up, and of course I was still strapped in. And anyway, I undid my straps and stood up on the seat of the aircraft, and I popped out of the aircraft just like a cork out of a champagne bottle. Unbelievable. That was not the way to get out of a Spitfire, but anyway, it worked. I could see the Germans coming in a vehicle, and when I hit the ground and I turned and ran in the opposite direction from where they were coming from, and there was a young man. I thought at the time he was a young boy, but it turned out he was about 21 years old. French boy, and he was waving at me to go in that direction, which I did, and ran to a large grove of trees, a bush, and ran into this bush and crawled under some brush and pulled it over my head and attempted to hide like the ostrich in the sand, sort of. I wasn't there more than maybe half a minute. I had a German rifle in my ear. Oh, gee. So they didn't waste any time in finding me. Well, I had been burned before I got out of the aircraft, and both my hands and my legs and my face were quite badly burned. And they really didn't know what to do. where to put me or what to do with me. And about 3 days I was here, there, and everywhere. I can vaguely remember being in several different places. And eventually I wound up in, they had made or opened a makeshift prisoner of war hospital in the city of Rennes, which was several hundred miles from where I was shot down. There was a group of French nurses. They were student nurses actually, and they would come in the morning and do their duties and spend the day in the hospital looking after the patients, and then go home at night and come back the next day. And the only doctor we had in the place at that time was an 83-year-old French doctor who came out of retirement, and he and these nurses did all of the medical work that was done, and even up to amputations and the whole bit. I was in this hospital in Rennes. It was actually Stalag 221. In the early part of August. The Allied forces, led by General George Patton, was advancing on Rennes, and had begun to pour in artillery and mortar fire and that type of thing. And there was this very strong French resistance group in Rennes who went out and convinced Patton not to perform his usual demolition job before his tanks came through. So when they came close to Rennes, where the German forces in the city of Rennes just packed up and left, so we were liberated from the hospital that same day. And there was an American hospital unit who had just landed in Cherbourg, right straight from the United States, and they were told that they had several hundred casualties at Rennes, and they had to, and they came down and set up a complete camp within hours of the liberation. Well, from there I was taken back to Britain and spent another few days, and by this time my burns were beginning to heal fairly well, and I spent a couple more days in the hospital in Britain, and then was sent on leave and spent 30 days or so on leave right in Britain, and eventually was sent home to Canada. And then in 2004, I was one of the official delegates for the Air Force Association to the 60th anniversary of D-Day. And while in France, I met a group of French people, and the group was called ANSA, A-N-S-A. Anyway, what their hobby is, their hobby is to locate crashed aircraft, both German and British or Allied, and try to locate and excavate them. And from their estimates, they thought there was something about 3,000 aircraft that had gone down in Normandy during the invasion period. And of that bunch, up to 2004, they had excavated close to 1,500, found and located. Where there's a fatality where the aircraft is, they put up a little memorial with the name, information about if it was the bombing crew, and all the names and the unit that it belonged to and so on. And if possible, they try to contact the surviving relatives. And in many cases, relatives have come from Canada and the United States and been there for a memorial service. So anyway, when I met this group in 2004, and they asked me about me having bailed out of an airplane and so on, so I explained it to them, and they said, well, you know, we think we know where your airplane is. And a short time after I got back to Canada, I got another communication from them, and they said, yes, we do know where it is, and we're going to excavate it on September 17th, I think it was, of 2005. Would you come over and be here for this? So in 2005, my wife and I and part of the family were there, and we went to the crash site of this aircraft and excavated. They used a backhoe, and pretty near every one of these airplanes, by this time, you know, it's after all 60 years later, and so we dug up this aircraft, and I managed to bring home one of the propellers, which was still out in my garage. Huge, 6 feet, 6 feet long, and weighed about 100 pounds again. And I got that on Air Canada, believe it or not. I don't know how. But anyway, a short time after I got home, a phone call from a very, very embarrassed Frenchman. He said, you know, I hate to tell you this, but he said that aircraft we dug up was not yours. It was a P-51 Mustang. Oh my God. So this answer group, they published this complete story about me going to France and how disappointed we were that they found the wrong airplane. And this story was published in the Falaise newspaper. And from that article, there were 4 people came forward and said, well, we know all about this. We actually saw me bail out of my airplane, and they knew where the aircraft had crashed. And one of the people who responded to this newspaper article was the wife of the young boy who I had ran across or met while I was running away from the Germans. Wenger. These are German fighter pilots. Billy Wenger.
That's the brother, right?
Brother, yeah. What he's doing in this picture, he's giving me back a 20mm cannon shell that I put into his brother's airplane.
Well, that's a piece of history.